Hello and welcome back to the Leadership Link. Today we're going to be learning to sell, which is a little bit of a different one. And with me, I've got Tom Hill. Tom, how you doing?
I'm all right, thank you, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you, mate. Not too bad. So yeah, before we jump into it, tell me a little bit about, I guess, your background for people that
Yep.
haven't spoken to or heard of you before. Like, what are you up to?
So currently, I'm the head of software for a company called MHR. So we make human resources, payroll, and finance B2B SaaS product, basically. In terms of my background, I've had my fingers in many pies. So not going all the way back to the very start, I kind of started out as a graphic designer before becoming a web designer, before moving into JavaScript programming. Then I went back to doing UI and UX design, so doing wireframes and graphic design work again, before eventually becoming a software engineer once more, working predominantly with React, but I've worked with a number of different JavaScript frameworks and kind of just built my way up through my career, assuming I was going to stay on the IC track. So working my way up to being a front-end software architect before eventually actually falling into the role of an engineering manager. And then I've subsequently been a director of engineering, a senior engineering manager, and now head of software. So I've done many things along the way.
Amazing. You don't see many people bounce from design to dev, back to design, and then back to dev again. Were you just always kind of like in between the two, and kind of like loved both, or like kind of figuring out exactly
Yeah.
what it was that you preferred?
So I think for me, I've always, personality type wise, I've always been very logical. However, I've always had a passion for creative stuff. So my degree was in music production, for example. I was in bands and spent time as a session musician and sound engineer and things like that as well.
Cool.
So creative field kind of felt more natural to me, hence starting in graphic design. Obviously, you still solve problems, you solve problems creatively. Naturally, the type of businesses you start in the beginning of your career, they had me as a graphic designer, but kind of went, can you do some web stuff? So I started having to play around with that, and then that piqued my interest as well. So I kind of fell down a rabbit hole doing that. I kind of always just flip flop back and forward between the two. So obviously there's a lot of overlap between, especially front end web development and design. And depending on what I was feeling more, I guess at the time, I kept switching back and forth between different career paths, before eventually landing in software and getting more out of that. I guess I think that's the point where I started to realize I'm getting to solve problems more and getting bigger problems here. After a while, the design stuff started to feel a little bit repetitive to me. Obviously, the world of design's advanced a lot since then, so I probably could have enjoyed that just as much, but I picked my path and have kind of stuck with it ever since.
Otherwise, you end up doing both not quite so well, don't you? If you keep trying to do both, so
exactly.
to kind of pick
I've
a
always
side
been
eventually.
a bit of a generalist, but you can't be a generalist across your career as well as within a particular career path, because there's no focus whatsoever.
For sure. But importantly, no sales experience throughout that career.
None.
So I guess when did it kind of first dawn on you? Was it literally day one as a manager, or was it like quite recently that it's dawned on you that like sales is such a big part of the job?
Most recently, I think. So swapped into management, obviously didn't think or acknowledge or make any connection or correlation between sales and what I was doing as a manager. That carried on right the way up really until I got to MHR. Now, it wasn't MHR specifically that made me think about, well, leadership and management is very much like sales. It was actually a book that I read, that kind of struck a chord with me there, which was a book called The Great Mental Models. It's by a company called Farnham Street, or a guy called Shane Parrish. And in that, he just talks about using models or mental models of different situations in different contexts. So like picking up or learning bits from physics and things like that. And at the same time as having read that book, just kind of stumbling around as you do on the internet, was reading various articles about startups and business models, and obviously how even technical founders, part of the role of being a technical founder is still sales, because whilst you're the only person running a business, you've still got to sell it in order for it to grow.
Yeah.
And then things started to fall into place. There was a lot of parity between what they were talking about in terms of actual sales technique, and they thought, well, that's kind of what I have to do. Like, it didn't really click until that point. I was like, actually, a lot of what I do as a leader and a manager, especially with things like recruitment or strategy or going to the business to ask for a budget in order to achieve something, all of those things hold a lot of parallels with what you do in sales, regardless of what type of sales or channel you're trying to do. Afterwards, I then kind of started to read a bit more, not necessarily about sales specifically, but sales related things, obviously about startups and growth and business models, and then applying some of the things and techniques that I learned in that into thinking about how I then do recruitment and how I do budget pitches and how I present strategies to the team.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, technical founder is like one thing of like actually having to sell like the entire organization and the product.
Yeah.
So like the outside world. So like let's put that one to kind of like one side. But like you said, there's a lot of things, recruitment, like selling ideas, like internally, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So much of it is sales related. So let's kind of go through some of those. So let's talk about recruitment. Obviously, something that I know
Yeah.
a little bit about.
More than me,
You'd hope. So, like, how much of like your recruitment process is selling working for you? Because it seems like from like an outside perspective, and particularly for a lot of candidates, there's a lot of, and this is great to hear you talking like this, because a lot of people get the impression that it's like, why do you want to work here? Like, and that's the approach that most companies like have. Like, why do you want to work? Which there is definitely a benefit of, and I get it, but it is so much, particularly for niche skill sets and very, very good people. Like, it has to go both ways. Like, so like, what do you find yourself doing, and in what ways are you kind of like selling as the engineering leader when you're in this recruitment process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you say, the traditional model, I think, is very much just a hangover from when there were more like candidates than jobs. When people were actively having to pursue jobs with companies, and companies had their pick of 20, 30, 40 people, it's obviously very important to go, well, why us? But especially with software engineering now, in the type of market we're in, although you could argue it's shifting a little bit back that way, there's a lot of competition for talented individuals. And unless you're at a company with ridiculously deep pockets, unless you are Google and Apple and Facebook, I can't afford to turn around and offer somebody £250,000 a year in order to land them. No matter how I structure that comp package, I just don't have that budget. So then I have to start thinking about, well, how do I compete for those people? So it's no longer, does this candidate want to work for me? They've applied. So I'm going to take it on verbatim that yes, they're interested in the role. At which point it's then, well, how do I convince them to come and work with me or come and work at the company I'm at, versus taking what is potentially going to be a more lucrative offer from a larger organisation with bigger pockets. At which point you then have to start to really think strategically, and that's kind of where the first click and light bulb moment came into play for me, which is recruitment is definitely the biggest overlap with sales. And it starts, again, thinking about it like a funnel. Obviously, the job description, the job spec you write is the first step in your sales funnel in order to landing somebody in a role. So you have to pay a lot of attention to detail to that, and it kind of, again, overlaps a little bit with go-to-market. So you've got to start to think about, well, as a candidate, what are they going to be looking for? And what does the type of individual that I want in this role value? Do they value creativity? Do they value autonomy? Are they valuing strong challenges? Are they valuing an opportunity to move into people management? Are they valuing creativity? What are the things that are interesting to them? And then you have to try and structure the job spec and the role around that. So you know the profile of the person you want, and you have to think about, how do I write the job spec to attract that person? What things from this role, what things from this business can I put in here that are going to act as a hook and encourage somebody to apply? And then it's kind of the next step in the funnel is obviously the first interviews. At which point I kind of imagine that a bit like prospecting. So a lot of the questions I ask then are both in order to determine somebody's suitability for the role, but also for me to gather a bit more information about that individual. So it's not just questions around how technically competent they are or things they've done in the past, but it's trying to ask questions in an open-ended way that draw out their values. Again, like what are the things they enjoy? What are the things they don't like about roles? What are the things that they've disliked about the role they're in at the minute? What's prompted them to leave? And then taking that information to again think about, well, at the end of this session, like a common question a lot of candidates will ask is like, why do you like working there? Or why would I like this job? Or why should I come and join you? That's become a question that candidates ask now. It's not just companies saying, why do you want to come work for us? But it's candidates asking companies, why should I come and work for you? And all that information you gather in that kind of prospecting phase, to borrow the term from sales, gives you a load of information on the kind of stuff to talk about. So you can then talk to them about the things that you can offer them that meet their values, the things that you can offer them that would remove the pain points from their current role, and the additional things that you might be able to offer that will pique their interest. So maybe it's not been a part of their role before, but very clearly this individual really loves creativity. And maybe you can carve a bit of a niche in this role and you can say to them, well, if you come and work for us, we can give you a position where you're going to be really closely collaborating with marketing or with design. And you're going to get to have a lot of conversations with customers and focus on and influence how we go about designing the platform. And that can be especially interesting for front-end engineers. For back-end engineers, similarly, you can offer them close relationships with maybe platform. So even if they're not going to be a DevOps engineer, you can talk about how you can offer them training to learn Azure, AWS, GCP, whatever your stack's built on, get them certified, get them working with the DevOps team, and you can help encourage and kind of sell what the advantages to working for your company are. And hopefully some of those points are enough for somebody to think, I would rather work there and take that opportunity than take a higher salary that's maybe on offer from a larger competitor.
Yeah, for sure. I think, first of all, to compare it to prospecting, imagine all of those candidates are sat at their desk, not looking for work, and you've cold called all of them to have those initial chats. And like you maybe it might be a little bit more similar, but like from like a discovery meeting point of view, it is really, really similar. And I think this is the issue that a lot of companies have is they're like, I need X, like this is, and like here's the list of like USPs or like benefits of like working here. And if people give that question of like, why should I work there, it's just here's the list of things, like here's the reasons, like we have a ping pong table, we have like all of this kind of stuff. Whereas like the reason why someone is going to work for you is going to be quite specific. It might be because of they might have had a terrible manager in the past that never spoke to them, and they're looking for someone like as like an actual mentor. If you go and spout like that you've got a hybrid work policy and like all of this stuff that's just not relevant, and like the day's holiday that you have, it's not going to click with that person. So you really need to do the discovery element in that first interview to be able to like sell to them like why they should join. Whereas I feel like a lot of people, they spend the entire interview process trying to qualify people out, that they get to the end of it and they've got a candidate that they're like, yep, ticks all the boxes, brilliant, but they don't know them. Like they don't know what really makes that person tick. So then all you have is salary, and you get to the end of it, you offer them the top of your budget because you really like them. There will always be a company that can offer more money. So if all you have is salary, like if you've got to that point with a candidate, like there will be another company that gets to that point that can offer them more money. And if that's all you've got to go on, you will lose. Whereas, like you said, someone might like there's a line, right? Like there's a line of like the minimum amount of money they need to have. They wouldn't be speaking to you if you weren't above that line already. So from that point of view, you're fine. Like if someone offers them double and they can offer a lot of the same things that you have, like obviously there's not really much you can do. But if people are within 10-20%, but there's one company that maybe they are fully remote, and the candidate you're speaking to actually wants a hybrid position. Like if you've not uncovered that, then that's not something that you can use as a sell. It's the same when we start speaking to people. For example, if you told me, yeah, we want people in a couple of days a week, and I speak to a candidate and they're like, oh, like I'm open to doing a couple of days a week, but I'd prefer remote. I probably wouldn't even send them to you, because
Yep.
they will find a job that is fully remote, and you will go through that process with that person, and it's not ideally what they want. So that there's so many parts of it. What do you, from your experience, like what do you see are the main sort of like levers to pull on people, like from like an engineering point of view? Like what are the main things that people care about at the moment from like an actual job as a software engineer to be really questioning into?
Yeah. I think it varies a bit, in all honesty. I'm surprised at the number of engineers that I've spoken to recently, especially given how strong the push and conversation around remote is. I'm a big proponent of remote first, and I've worked in entirely remote companies. So I was quite surprised myself how many engineers are wanting to do some time on site. The amount of time people want to work on site varies. I'll probably say the average is probably once or twice in a week.
Yeah.
But I was still surprised at the number of people. I've even come across a few people that are saying, despite it being hybrid, they want to come in every day of the week. So that was a bit of a surprise to myself. But I think the general thing a lot of engineers tend to value is autonomy. It's probably one of the biggest ones. Like they like being able to solve problems and solve problems in the way that they see most appropriate to do. And then the next thing is usually career growth. Like a lot of engineers, again, value how much effort is the company going to put into helping develop me? Are you going to give me opportunities to learn new technologies, to learn new parts of the stack, to go to conferences, to attend different courses, gain certifications? And a lot of engineers really value that. I think, as much stereotypical as it would be, I think a lot of engineers are very intrinsically motivated. There are some that do it for extrinsic reasons. They like being able to show off what they've built, or they do it because they know it's a lucrative career path. But I dare say the majority of engineers I talk to are very motivated by wanting to get better at what they do, wanting to be able to solve more complex problems, wanting to be able to build more intelligent software. And obviously, as the technology landscape accelerates even quicker into the world of AI, I think there's definitely a peak in how can I cross my skills over into that space? How can I start to contribute and become a part of that next step in the evolution of technology, as we call it?
I think that's the main thing, right? And like you've probably seen it more than anyone in the world of sort of like front end development. Like JavaScript frameworks change like every 2 years, and everyone's like, this is the best thing ever. And then like no one touches it again, like afterwards.
Yeah,
And one of the biggest things as a software engineer is, if I join this company, like what's their approach to technology? Are they going to move with like the right technology moving forwards, or have they picked their stack and they're sticking with it and they're just going to continue with it? And
yeah,
that's why the majority of companies now as well, they're not necessarily even hiring for specific tech stack experience. They're hiring for like mindset and the right engineering principles and the
yeah,
ability to like pick new things up and things like that, because you know that in 3-4 years time you could still be working at that same company, but the landscape and your of the work that you're doing and the tech stack that you're working on could be entirely different. Like you said, it could be they might be reviewing code that's been spat out by AI and like making sure it's secure, and like, well, it might be a completely different role. Like you have no
yeah,
idea. So you should be hiring for the person, not the fact that they've done the exact bit of work that you need doing right now at another company. You
yeah,
That's great if they have, but it's about the person, right? And the same for for them when choosing a company? Like, is this company going to adapt and help me grow for the changing technology landscape? Or are they going to realize in 3 years' time they don't need a front end developer, they need an AI engineer, sack me and hire someone else? Like, what type of company are they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of, it tops and tails that entire process as well. Like when you're thinking about hiring, even if you've already signed off the budget, like you need to have thought about the profile, avatar, whatever you want to call it, for the individual that you want to hire. Like what things are going to fit well with your strategy, with the business, with the technology you've got. What kind of attributes in an individual do you want to look for? Which then helps you structure the job advert. It helps you ask the right questions at interviews so you find the right type of candidate. And then exactly what you say, one of the hardest things about being in any leadership role in technology at the minute is because of the rate of change, you have to try and balance and think about the pragmatism of saying, well, as a company, we can't pivot our tech stack every 2 years, every time something new comes out. But equally, we can't turn around to candidates and entice them in by saying, we're using this technology and that's the only thing you'll touch for the next 10 years. So again, you have to try and look for and think about opportunities that overlap with that. Like being able to say, this is the main technology stack we use. We can offer you training and things in these areas, and this is how we handle the adoption of new technology. And again, that becomes part of your sales pitch. Like if you don't have a strategy for thinking about how you're going to adopt and leverage new technology as it comes along, then you're going to fail to be able to meet both sides of that coin. You'll either be in a company whose strategy is always use the shiniest thing, and you end up building a pile of stuff that becomes really hard to maintain because you've got lots of bits of dribs and drabs of technology that people have picked up and put down, and they might not necessarily play well together. They might not even be maintained into the future. And then equally, if you've failed to think about your strategy for adoption, you then don't know how to turn around to a candidate and offer them that as an opportunity. Like, how can you explain to them that they're going to be able to learn and develop and adapt and stay current with the time and not just be told, here's your pigeonhole, get very good at this one niche thing, please, despite the fact that they may not be the best thing for the longevity of their career or for the business.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, it's the same from the other side. I'd say one of the biggest reasons that candidates get rejected from a lot of companies is they're like, what are you looking to do next? And they're like, I want to work with the latest and greatest technologies. And if you just ask why, like so many people fall down at that one question, like of why they want to work with those things. And when given the opportunity of latest and greatest versus the right thing for the job, like people still steer towards latest and greatest. And like you said, companies don't need to adopt a lot of this stuff if stuff's working. You need to like future proof and like kind of plan for what you might do eventually. But if it's working right now, that's its job. And that's what the job needs to be, right? You don't just all of a sudden just throw stuff in because it's new and shiny. And I think candidates need to understand that as well. So they said, I think we could probably talk for another 3 or 4 hours about like recruitment strategies and selling to candidates and all that kind of stuff, because it's obviously an area that I'm super passionate about, and clearly you are as well. But that's, like you said, probably one of the biggest areas of selling in your role, as you said. What are some other areas, like particularly it's more sort of like internally, right, that you're kind of selling your team and kind of what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. People give it lots of different terms. Like obviously, a lot of people just generally think of it as like being a champion for your team or your area. Or people call it brag book as well, don't they? Where they keep a list of all the things that they've achieved. But part of the role of being a manager and a leader is making sure that the wider business is aware of the achievements of your team. Obviously, part of that is just going out there and talking to people, which isn't really that dissimilar to doing pitch or doing marketing as you would in sales. You're kind of turning around to people and saying, look at all the things that we've done, but you've got to do equally the inbound portion of that. So it's not just about standing up at town halls or going in front of the business and saying, look at all the stuff we achieved in the last quarter, and these are all the things that we've done. But it's going to the same people, those same stakeholders, and finding out, again, doing a little bit of prospecting and market research, like what are the problems that you guys are facing, and looking for opportunities for your team to solve some of those problems. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But you might go and talk to a product partner or someone in the marketing team or someone in pre-sales team, and you'll find out some information about things that are making their life harder that's within the remit of you and your team to solve. So that might be that you discover that there's a particular bit of the platform that is always the stumbling block for pre-sales. Customers get to this one bit and they ask this question, and the answer is always, no, we can't do that. Or it doesn't do it yet. And that can kind of give you some information of there's a pretty critical problem that you can solve for the business, and you can win yourself some friends and allies. It means that you can build a good relationship internally within the company, both personally as a leader, like building your brand and your network, but also, again, having something to be able to tell candidates and people in your team about the opportunities you can provide. Because you're not just waiting for stuff to come into the team, but you're going out and looking for opportunities. And a lot of these projects are then the great things that you can use to help upskill an individual. So if you've got a really strong senior engineer that wants to move into a staff role, or is potentially looking at moving into an architecture role, you can go and talk to these people in the company and find out these problems that maybe don't appear on the product roadmap. And you can create a little project for them to go and stretch their legs. You can give them an opportunity to work on something that's of value to the business, that is of value to the customers, that is otherwise not being dealt with. And then they can demonstrate their ability to own and drive a project, to work with stakeholders and to do something of value. And it gives them a nice big impact statement on their CV. And it gives you an opportunity to help them grow their career. Whereas if you just sit and wait for things to roll in, the classic problem is you get senior engineers and it becomes very difficult to help them step up into those next roles because the opportunities aren't there very often. And when they do come around, you've then got several teams and several managers and several leaders that are all vying and competing for this opportunity at the same time because they've waited for it to come to them rather than being proactive and going out and networking and looking for opportunity within the business.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's one of those things, a lot of the time we get asked from sort of clients to find engineers that can develop with like end customers in mind and like really understand the product and things like that. But it's tough because the majority of people are going to be working on a product that they've never used in an industry that they've never been on the other side of. So how can you really get into the mind of your customer from like an engineering point of view? It just doesn't really work. But you as like a leader of that team, like it's not like you need to start calling customers and being like, what do you like, what do you not like about the platform? But you can go and speak to your sales team, you can go speak to your customer success team and be like, have you had any more, like what are people wanting, what are people needing, like all of that kind of stuff, and start being like, well, we could do that. Like that would be quite easy because sometimes they might think as a sales team something is a huge project for you guys, whereas it could be quite an easy implementation. And if you're not building that bridge like between yourself and like the other teams, like that knowledge doesn't flow directly, right? So
No.
how did you go about like starting to build those sort of cross-functional relationships? Are they things that happened quite naturally, or were you like, this is a thing that I need to go and work on building these relationships?
Absolutely the latter. I'm very much the classic introverted engineer. I didn't like stepping outside of my comfort zone. To me, networking was a very dirty word. Like it felt very much like I'm just seeking opportunity from people. It felt a bit seedy. And then again, it's kind of the slow realization that once you're in this kind of role and you start to talk to your manager and you start to get feedback on the opportunities in your career, one of the things that you'll always be told is you need to work more closely with the rest of the business. And it's very awkward at first. It feels very unnatural as an engineer and an engineering manager to go and ask to have a sit-down meeting with the pre-sales rep. So what did you want to talk about? I don't really know. At first, you feel like you're just reaching out to people because you know you need to make these connections, but you don't know how. And that's all right. At first, I think the place to start is to actually get to know people. That's kind of the mistake I made initially with my attempts to network, is it was all me thinking about, well, how do I make the connection and get the opportunity or find the business value between that? But that's kind of missing the point. That's what makes networking have that dirty word mentality, is it you feel like it's just about extracting value from somebody or taking something, when actually it's more about building a genuine connection. So I actually just started meeting with people for a coffee, having a chat. And then when they'd ask why I wanted to meet them, it's like, well, I'm just looking to try and build some relationships with other people in the business. And I'd talk about my family, their families, hobbies, interests, kids, just sit and have a coffee, meet, even just once a month, and slowly build a relationship. And eventually you start to begin naturally to just talk the same way you would with any other peer within your engineering department about the problems you're facing. They start to talk to you about the problems that they're facing. And that's when you then start to have those conversations where you can see those opportunities. They might say something and they go, oh, hang on, I could help you with that. Or I think I can see an opportunity to help you with that. And equally, when you reach a point where you're like, we're not sure what to do here, like we're trying to solve this problem, or we're not sure what the customer's going to value, they may know the answer. You explain to them the problem, and to them it might be crystal clear. So you say they're on the phone with the customers or prospective customers day in, day out, and they will have some insight that maybe they didn't even realize was valuable. Hence, it was never mentioned to the product manager or to the user experience designer before. It's only by having a genuine relationship where you're just talking the same way you do with your other peers that this information tends to slip out in natural conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And I've noticed that about networking. I think when I was a bit younger, like I used to go to networking events and I would be just looking for like immediate like wins. And I wouldn't realize that the whole point, like you said, of going is to like meet 10 new people for over the next 1 to 5 years. Like we might be able to work together. And like that's a really valuable thing. Like if I could like book 10 prospecting meetings and just go and meet all 10 people in a day, I'd be like, that's probably the best day of meetings I've ever had. Whereas if you can just go to a network event, have 10 chats with people and then go away with it, you come away with nothing immediately, but like eventually what you can get from it is huge. And it's a lot of those second and third degree connections of, oh, like I met this guy at this thing, like I should introduce you to, like it's not necessarily always with that person and all that kind of stuff. And I think taking away like wanting something out of it is a huge thing of how to build those sort of like relationships. And I think when you get to know someone personally, it makes a big difference. Because say for example they have 3 customers in a week complain about a certain feature, if they've got to write like a whole email or like request a meeting with the head of software, that's very different to just slacking Tom and being like, hey mate, like we've had 3 people say this thing, is that something that you reckon you might be able to help with? And you can be like, cool, let's set up 30 minutes, I reckon, let's chat through it. Like it's just a much easier flow of information, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I say a lot of the time it can even just be, it helps communication flow. They say that's the main thing, isn't it? They might come to you and say, we've had a customer or pre-sales people going, this has come up like 3 times in the last week. Actually, there's already something on the roadmap for that. Like that happened once 6 months ago and it was deemed low value and it's sat there on the product backlog, but we're not doing anything with it. And that conversation can then be a trigger to go and talk to the product manager and say, hey, I've just spoken to pre-sales and they're telling us recently they've had a flurry of customers that are all saying they want this thing and it's not there. Well, we've got a plan for that. It's sat there, we've already spoken about it, we've thought about whether it's feasible, how we're going to build it. Like, maybe we should consider bumping that up and getting that into the roadmap sooner, which is going to enable these opportunities for pre-sales. And it can be those little bits of conversation that otherwise don't happen or just don't get surfaced, or they do, but it's too late. You have that flurry of those requests, and then that slowly trickles its way through the processes and systems that you have, all the different tickets that might get raised, or backlogs of notes from sales calls eventually feeding into product. By the time you come to realize that was important, that flurry of customers that maybe could have all signed on have been and gone. And we didn't react fast enough at just being able to go back to pre-sales and say, spoken product, so we're going to bump it up the roadmap. We're going to start working that in a week or two. Enables them to phone those customers back whilst they're still warm and say, we've spoken with product and engineering and we're going to start to work on this in the next few weeks, and it'll be in the platform by the end of the quarter maybe. And that can be enough to convince a customer to carry on with the sales process, whereas before they might have dropped out of the funnel completely.
For sure. I bet there's people missing out on business, but like the engineering team is actually working on a feature that the sales team doesn't know about, and you're already
Yep.
working on it, but because the communication's not there, they're being like, oh, sorry, we can't do that. Even though in a few months' time they will be able to, because there's just not that free flow of communication there. So yeah, so important. And I think from that we've kind of had people coming into the business, we've had like kind of peers within the business. Like what's it like, I guess, learning to sell almost like upwards towards like your boss and like C-level on the board and execs, like, because that must be, particularly the higher you go up the management chain, like I'd imagine
Yeah.
that would be one of the hardest bits about leadership, particularly from being a very technical person to then selling
Yeah.
to like someone that is your manager, but also like a lot of the times non-technical. Like what was that like when you first started doing it, and how do you find that now?
Yeah, that's definitely a shock to the system, because you will get very far. You will even get to head of level, potentially even director of level. And most of the times that you're doing that, the person you're pitching it to has a technical background. So you end up having those conversations, making those proposals. And a lot of it is focused on the technical side of it, the technical benefits, whether that's performance, security, other things like that. But eventually, like you say, you'll start having a conversation where when you come to pitch it, the person you'll pitch it to, the CTO might be there. But otherwise, it's the CEO and the CFO or the head of finance and people like that that don't have a technical background. And if you then try and present the proposal to them that's focused on the technical thing, the first things they'll start doing is going, well, I don't understand that. But B, what's the return on investment? How much is it going to cost me? How much am I going to make out of it? And a lot of the time, again, as a technical leader, you've not even thought about that. So you're then put on the spot going, well, it will make the platform quicker. Great, but why should I spend a lot of money on making the platform quicker if it doesn't give me anything in return? And you'll very quickly start to learn at that point, actually, I've now got to figure out how to stop speaking technical and start speaking business, which is still a massive area of growth for me. I'm still learning a lot of business speak and lingo, especially stuff to do with finance, but figuring out how to treat it like a pitch, which is effectively what it is. You need, despite the solution maybe being very technical, the strategy isn't technology. Technology is part of your strategy. So you have to start thinking about, well, what benefit does this bring to the business? How can I turn that into language where the CFO and the CEO is going to understand what the problem is, why this is a solution for their problem, what the benefit of that problem being solved would be for them, for the business, for the customer, whether that's enablement of sales, whether it's retention of customers, whether it's just the fact that we can have more people on the platform at once without increasing our cost of infrastructure. Whatever that benefit is, you have to start to learn to spin a story. You have to be able to start talking about a bit of a journey of, this is where we are now. Like, this is a problem we're facing. If we don't solve this problem, this is where we might find ourselves. Now think about how good it would be if we can solve this problem. Like, here are all the things we can get if we can solve this problem. Here's how I'm proposing that we solve that. And you've already got them then thinking about, well, I get where we are. I understand the problem. I can see the downside to not solving the problem. I can now think about how good it would feel and all the advantages that would come to me and the business and everyone else if we solve this problem. And then you present your technology solution. Like, this is the strategy I've outlined to solve it. This is how it would solve it at a high level. And you've already solved the benefits and you've got them on board. Storytelling is quite important in the end. And all of that is the same kind of thing you do as a business when you pitch. Whether you're pitching to investors, whether you're pitching to potential partners, it's all the same thing. You have to talk about the story, the problem, not solving it, what it would feel like to solve it, and then the strategy that you're presenting to get us from A to B.
Yeah, for sure. Because it is such a different mindset, right? Like having to sell to someone that doesn't care about the same things as you. Like even
Yeah.
that example that you use, if you go in, you speak to your CEO and be like, "Is this going to speed up the platform?" Like they might be immediately like, "Well, why is the platform slow? Like we're paying
Yeah.
you and the engineers a lot of
Yeah.
money to have this, but I didn't even know it was slow. Like so, fix that. Like and that's it. Like that's the end of your whole thing. Whereas you
Yeah.
actually might have needed more people, more investment to do that. It might just be immediate like that. Whereas if you were like, well, because of the current speed of the platform, 20% of customers are actually dropping off and not signing up because it's not loading quick enough. Like, so we're actually missing out on this like revenue number. Like, if we could speed it up, I believe that we could capture at least half of that. Like, that's what they care about. And you'd be like, oh, yeah, we should do that. And then you can be like, we would bring in this much per year. Therefore, can I have this much to hire another engineer to help us do that? And
Yep.
it's just a completely different way of thinking, right? And like how like was and feel free to change names of companies and people, but like the first time that you had this type of meeting, was it a complete shit show, or like had you kind of realized that you needed to get into kind of their mentality and really prepared in like the right way? Because that people, I imagine so many people must get blindsided with their first like non-technical sort of like
Yeah.
internal pitch.
It definitely could have been a shit show. I was lucky, is the way I'd phrase it. So I went into that meeting and my manager, who was the VP of engineering, was with me. And I basically conducted the presentation. I say it was far too focused on technical, and those questions started coming in, and I was immediate rabbit in the headlights. Like, did not expect that, didn't know how to handle it, or like even think about how to translate it. Luckily, he did. So he kind of stepped in and fielded those questions and managed to massage some of the stuff that was in the slide deck, some of the things I talked about, and make it sound in a way that they understood, or that they at least comprehended a bit better. So it didn't lead to an immediate like, yeah, go ahead and do that. But if he hadn't have been there, that idea would have been shot down in its entirety. They'd have just been like, no, I don't see the benefit to doing this. Whereas this allowed them to see some of the opportunity, at which point they're like, go back, think in a bit more detail about the strategy and about what the benefit is, and then come back to us again when you can answer some of these questions. So it kind of saved my skin there, just by having him and that ability already, having been there and done it in the past, to step in and help shoulder some of those questions. But it's definitely a shock. And it was one of those things that I did once and learned very quickly how I've been presenting before and how I've been thinking about solutions and strategies before just isn't going to cut it at this level.
No, for sure.
There was no way.
And I think we spoke we said previously before we recorded this that a lot of the way that you had learned was sort of like trial and error, like, and it seems like now you're being very proactive, reading books, like obviously reading like a lot of articles and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were to do it again, or for like anyone that wants to learn more about this or kind of the stuff that you're in at the moment, like where would you recommend people going to start looking at and kind of getting into more of these sales resources from what you've looked at already?
It's kind of twofold. I learned a lot just by beginning to talk to people in the business that were doing those roles. When you start to just have an honest conversation with sales and product and other people and ask them about how they do their job and why they do things in a particular way, you'll learn a lot. The rest of the stuff I kind of learned was adopting that kind of mental models idea and then just reading a lot, which I've always done anyway. I started to change the types of books I read. So they weren't just all focused around technology and architecture and design patterns and things like that, but I started reading books about startups and product management, and then psychology as well, things like Nudge by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, which is all about like questions architecture, really. It's like the choices that you make and the choice architecture you come up with and how that influences how somebody would make a decision. And then it was learning about the business, so starting to learn about how startups are created, how businesses create value, like Influence by Robert Cialdini is another good one as well. That's all about, again, like human psychology and how people influence each other and things like that, and all those kind of little bits, and just taking snippets of it and then trying to go, well, I can see how that could relate to this thing. Again, a good example is obviously the recruitment thing. You're trying to influence a candidate's decision. So you can then start to borrow bits out of this, out of those books, out of the things you learn, and try applying them and see what works for you. Because it's going to depend a lot on you, on the individual you're talking to, on the business you're in. There's loads of different factors that will change all these different things. If you begin to try and apply some, you'll figure out what works for you. But for me, most of it's been from reading books on lots of different topics, not just sales, but like say psychology, product development, product management, startups, business in general, finance, and taking little snippets where I think, oh, that seems really close to this thing I'm doing, and trying to apply it and see what happens.
Sure. And I think that that's relevant for the engineering, but it's also relevant for like leadership in general, from like a point of view of if you have like one mentor, like, or you've had like one manager, like all you know about management is from that person's perspective, and that might not work for you at all as like a person as to how you should manage. So the best leaders that I speak to, they've always got this breadth of like networking relationships and resources that they pull bits that suit them. And like you said, you might read an entire book and then there'd just be one thing and be like, like that is brilliant. You don't necessarily read a book by one person and be like, well, I guess I'm going to lead like Steve Jobs now, like, because I've read his book. Like, but there might be 99% of his book you don't agree with, but one bit that you're like, that'd be perfect, that I can add that in. And it's just like getting the most amount of people around you and the most amount of different books. And like you said, the broader the spectrum of people, so maybe you go and get yourself like 5 mentors, and they're from completely different size companies and industries and all that kind of stuff. You'll be so much more well prepared, rather than trying to find people that are very similar to you. Actually being able to borrow things from loads of different companies and loads of different perspectives and loads of different backgrounds, like you said, looking at like psychology and sales books and all this kind of stuff will give you such an arsenal of things to put together that you'll be able to not only add a lot of things to your own personal arsenal, but also understand like how everyone else is thinking and what's important to them.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. It's almost the knowledge equivalent to the DE&I push that's happening in the world at the minute, as businesses are realizing that it's important to have people with different ways of thinking, different educational backgrounds, different work experiences, different life experiences, and how having that mix of people that can all look at one problem together and all come at it from 7, 8, 9, 10 different angles helps you produce the best outcomes, versus having a load of people that all look at something the same way and come to that same conclusion and miss out on this big spectrum of other ways of looking at it. It's the knowledge equivalent to that. Like, it doesn't matter what problem you're trying to solve, the bigger pool of information from different sources you can gather, the more effective you're going to be in producing innovative, creative solutions to solve problems, which is ultimately what you're paid to do as a software engineer, really.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. If anyone's got any follow-up questions, I know you're quite active on LinkedIn. Is that the best place for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, definitely. Amazing. Just add a connection or send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat to new people.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it. Chat to you soon.
Speak to you soon, Chris. Thank you. Bye-bye.